Hi, and welcome to week 3. We're going to kind of fix up your ball bounces and render and do Playblast, which allows us to view your animation, your timing, the whole thing outside of Maya. So you're already watching the video. I posted just the one principal page. I find this creative blog to show it off really well. I do want you to go through it again. You know, there are a lot of them. It is important that you start trying to remember them. I would love if you could try to memorize them. If not, maybe print out a sheet with them next to you so that while you're working on the animation, you can be thinking about all these things. Okay, again, you don't have to think about them all at once, but think about them as you go along. Once you've finished, then look back, play your animation, think about the timing, think about your exaggeration, and just kind of go through and see if they're all being effective. You know, as we go through the course, there are going to be more involved animations where you're really going to be able to play with these more, but all of these can be used in the ball bounce. Now, what is a Playblast and what is a render? We're really going to be going over this today so that you can submit and see your animations in real time. The websites I provided just kind of go over what it is. I'm going to go over it as well, but just so you have second sources. So in Maya, all I did was just an up and down here. I don't have any of the principles in it yet, anything like that. Let me actually just do a few more keyframes. Okay, let's see. So right now, this is playing, and remember, we always want to right mouse click on our time slider, playback speed, and make sure it is real time. But the more you have going on in your scene, I don't want to try to break it, but you know, in our scenes, we won't just have one thing moving, and it won't be as simple as a ball. You're going to have environments and level designs and props and double characters animating, all these things that will boggle down your file, okay? So while we're hitting play and it is set to real time, sometimes you'll find that actually it's playing slower than you thought. But you might not know because we're just hitting play. Why wouldn't it play, right? Or maybe you have something running on your computer that's slowing it down, but you don't know. So what Maya does is it tries to play it in real time, which again is 24 frames per second. But if there's something going on with your computer, it might skip a few frames to make up for lost time. A lot of things can happen, okay? Again, most of the time it's accurate, but we have what's called a Playblast. And a Playblast is a preview render of your viewport. And what that does is it allows us to watch this video, this animation, outside of Maya. One, if you're working on a team, you can email this, you know, and anyone can open it on any, you know, it's just a movie file. It's not a Maya file. But you're seeing it outside of the software, and so you know that's the timing that you have, okay? So a few things I want to talk about first. If you don't see this count, that's fine. This is more for modeling. So this is a polygon count, so how many polygons are in the sphere, how many four-sided faces, display, heads-up display, and poly count, and that's gone. What you do need to think about, though, is what our camera is going to be seeing. So in every viewport menu, and what I mean by that is each one has their own menu, you can go in and there's this blue ball with a white rectangle around it. And this is called your resolution gate. And what that does is if I turn that on, we're seeing now what my camera sees. By default, Maya has a camera of 640 by 480. We can change that. So we can just go into our settings up here, render settings. It's a clapboard with a gear. And if we scroll down, image size, the preset here, I'm going to do 1920 by 1080. That's high resolution, HD, you know. If you find that you're having an issue on your computer running it this high, you can do 1280 by 720. But now you can see that I have a rectangular view, and this is what's actually going to render. So there's a difference here, because if I'm just looking at my viewport and I think I have it set up really nicely, like, oh, I think my ball is half off the frame, when I go to do this, you see it's more than half off. So you want to make sure your resolution gate is on and then check your animation. And it's like, oh, well, that, you know, maybe this isn't the best angle for the whole thing. You can move around. Maybe we'll just move it down a little bit. Okay, but you know, we talk about composition and framing and appeal, and you know, you want to make sure that the object that you're animating is always going to be in the camera's view. As we move forward in the class, we're actually going to create our own cameras and then animate to those cameras. But for this, we're just working on that, okay? So now that I have that set up, I'm going to go through some fixes. So, and we'll still get to the Playblast and render. This video is working with a 2D bounce, but I do think it's beneficial for what you're doing. Kind of just tells you what to go through. So your main drawings are your keyframes. So we set up the bounce at the top of the arc when it hits the ground. Top of the arc, ground, top of the arc, ground, etc., etc. Then we play it. And then you can adjust your timing and your spacing. So I wanted to go over that a little bit first. So let's say I want to go over here. Let's do the right side. Okay, so I don't know why, but for some reason I'm used to it bouncing from the left to the right. You can do either way. You know, a couple things that I'm seeing with your first submissions. One, make sure when you're working with the bottom controller that you're aiming it towards where the ball is going. So if we're going to add some stretch and we want to angle it towards where the ball is bouncing to. Okay, and then the other thing I'm seeing is make sure your ball doesn't squash until it hits the ground. So I think that was 15. So we've got it coming. It can remove the stretch, but then you want it to actually hit the ground first. So there are a couple things we can do with our keys. I went over last week that you can copy, right mouse click, make sure you're clicking to the right of the red line. Right mouse click, copy, click, and paste, paste. You can do that. We can also move these, and we can adjust them as one key or a bunch. So for instance, it looks like my ball is hitting at 13, or at least maybe that's where I want to start the squash. But I set my key here at 15. How can I move it? If you hit Shift on your keyboard and click and drag over the key, and then you can use these arrows to move it. Okay? Now don't forget, each controller has their own timeline. So if you want to grab all of them, you want to click and drag over everything to move multiple at a time. And I know that's something that takes a little bit to get used to. So if that isn't making sense, feel free to reach out to me and we can talk about it more. Now, let's say I'm going through my whole bounce and for some reason I want it to be faster or slower. I love the keyframes that I have, I like the movement that I've had, the squash and the stretch that I have, but it's just too fast. If I click and drag to select all of my controllers, I can see all of the keys that I have. I can hold Shift and click and drag over all of them. These middle arrows move them all. So if I wanted something to just start later or earlier, the arrows on the left and right outside scale them. So if I click and drag this out, my keys are moving proportionally to extend. Now, the more space between keys, the longer an action is going to take, right? Because there's more frames there, so it's more time. The closer your keys are together, the faster they're going to be because there's less frames, less time. Now, when you scale, like look at my key that's around 24. See how that's not lining up? Right now it's lining up with the lines, the yellow and the gray, but it's in the middle. That's because Maya is proportionally scaling these, and some of the information might fall in between frames. So what we need to do whenever you scale, make sure you write a note of this or do whatever you need to do. You're going to right mouse click and go to Snap. And what that does is it snaps all of your keys to the closest whole number. So let's take a look. Okay? So if I do the reverse, I hold Shift, click and drag to select everything. I'll use that arrow. I'm going to bring them real close together. Right mouse click, snap to get it to the closest whole frame. I'll zoom in so we can play this on a loop. It's the exact same keys, they're just moving significantly faster. Okay? So between copying and pasting and holding Shift to adjust your keys, you can make some pretty significant animation changes without having to reanimate things. All right? So, check your timing, you can move things. Now it's talking about making your in-betweens. So, that's going through, for us, adding some of that squash and stretch, more of the stretch. I'm going to zoom this back out a little bit. Let me show you also what happens if I only grab one. So I'm going to work on that squash and stretch again. Got my top controller here. Copy. Paste. All right. So I've added just some stretch. It's like, oh, Jen, this is happening faster than I would like. Well, we can move this over. Oops. I'm just going to use the middle arrows to move it. Now, it doesn't have to be directly in the center. Think about your timing and where you want it to be. But because I have animation on this top controller, my main controller, and this base controller, if I start to scale keys and only select one, watch what happens. So right now, I can even just play it. Everything's lined up, working well. If I'm like, oh man, I want to just scale, we'll do the bottom so we can see it faster. I hold Shift. I'm like, okay, I'm going to scale all my keyframes. Great. See how it's now glitching because this top stretch is taking longer, but I didn't scale any of my other keyframes. I also didn't hit snap, which could be an issue later, so make sure you're doing both. Okay, so if you're going to scale anything, select all of your controllers. So you can see I've got a key for one part here and another part right after. They don't always overlap. If they do overlap, that's fine and dandy. There's only going to be one red line, even though I have a key for both the top and the main one at that point in time. Okay, but so then the next kind of step is looking at those in between. So if I've got my key and my key, great. I've got this stretch in between here. I did not snap my keys. So see how this line is in the middle? We want to make sure we snap them. I'm just doing Command Z to undo. Man, I must have done that a long time ago. Okay, here we go. Look guys, now I've created a glitch. So you can see it happens to everybody. So I can either go through and try to fix what's happening, or we can delete some keys. So I can hold Shift, select, and delete. Okay, so I'll grab my main controller. I'm not going to redo this whole thing, but just so we can get the gist here. And 14. Okay. Anyway, so you've got your main bounce, then you look kind of at your in-betweens, the middle. Test it again. See what you think. Fill the drawings in between. So this we don't need to do, but what this is saying is work on your ease in and ease out. So this is going to be evenly done. It gets from point A, so frame 1, to point B, keyframe 2, in 14 frames, and it goes equally the whole time. What you can do is hold it for a frame or two. So maybe I'm just going to bump it. I'm going to work on this one. I'm just going to bump it up and over a little bit and hit S. So see, it holds and then it's going to go faster. It's not even something that you really notice. You can kind of see it almost like slides out now, and that's the greatness that is ease in and ease out. Very minor, but makes a big difference. So go in and make sure at that top of the arcs it should be slower, and then as it's coming down it increases in speed, right? It's getting that energy to fall down towards the ground. Gravity is pulling it down, so it's going to speed up as it goes to the ground. And then we're going to test it again. Then think about your squash and stretch, which I know we kind of talked about last class, so you probably will have this, but make sure we're hitting the ground and then we're stretching in the direction that we want to go into. And then stretch on our arc here. And then test. Okay. And then paying attention to the final and timing. So for these test kind of sections, you can just play, in Maya, or we can do that Playblast that I talked about. And you will need to submit a Playblast for part of your assignment this week. But what you want to do is set up your timeline here to show however many frames you want. You know, we don't want 120 frames if our animation is 31, because then when we play it, there's just a negative dead space afterwards. So you can hold it a few frames after if you want. I'll say 35. I can type in 35 here. You can also zoom in and out with this. Then I'm going to right mouse click on my timeline. There's this Playblast at the very bottom. I'm going to hit the option box next to it. So this is just going to show whatever is in your viewport. So make sure your viewport is set up to show off the bounce. That's why I like to turn on the resolution gate, just so I can see. It's going to show you the view. Ornaments are like anything that's on, like where it says perspective X and the resolution there, and all of that's fine. Format, you're just going to leave. I would do H264. Display size from window, 0.5 scale. So this is just going to make a lower resolution video because we don't really care what it looks like. We're focusing on the timing of the action. And then you want to click Save to File, and you can browse. You can just save it on your desktop, whatever you want to call, ball bounce test. Save, and then hit Playblast. You're going to see it actually go through the action, and then it's going to pop up a video for you. So now this is a video file. If I hit play, I can see my animation to speed. Now this isn't a final animation. You would not want to really like put this in your portfolio or anything like that. We can see the viewport, we can see the elements in the viewport, the grid, the rig controllers, and that's not a finalized render, but it is a great way to show you the timing and get references. If you wanted to get feedback, you could send this to people. Again, it can be played outside of Maya. Okay? So that's part of your assignment for this week, is to create a Playblast, but I recommend you doing it along the way as well. And then your final this week, or your assignment for this week is to make adjustments to your ball bounce. Think about timing, arc, and squash and stretch in particular. After you've made the adjustments, create a Playblast and a render. Now, for rendering, you will need some sort of editing software. I prefer to use After Effects. I know some people don't have that, and so there are other things you can use. You can email me if you're not sure what to use. It's also in the lab, so if you go to the BAC or even at Ward, you can use any of those labs, and it's just Adobe After Effects. I'm going to go over how to use After Effects in just a minute, so you can do that, and all you'll be doing is putting it together. So it does take some time to render and to learn how to do it, but really the majority of your work will be done in Maya, and then we're just bringing it together in After Effects. Okay? All right, so how to render. We're going to go to your render settings. It's the fourth clapboard, the one on the right with the gear, or you can go to Windows, Rendering Editor, Render Settings. Okay? We're going to use Maya software, so start at the top here. Arnold is a very common renderer, and it's developing more and more. It's been a part of Maya for probably 4 or 5 years now, but again, that has different requirements, different lighting, all this kind of stuff, so we're going to just start with Maya software. Then, file name, you're going to need to give it a name. So, Fuller Ball, bounce. Again, same rules apply here. No special characters, avoid numbers, avoid spaces. Okay? Image format. You can choose whichever you want. I recommend JPEG, Targa, TIFF. You can do a PNG that will put transparency in the background. So for this, let's use Targa files. TIFF sometimes is easier to be read if you're on a Windows computer or PC. We can do TIFF. Now, name.extension. That's if you want to render a single frame, but we're focusing on an entire animation, so we need name.number.extension. Again, write this down. None of these other ones work. I don't know why they're here. What this means is it'll be fuller ball bounce dot one dot tiff. So it's referencing the name and the image format. So if I'm rendering 35 frames, it'll be fuller ball bounce dot one dot tiff, fuller ball bounce dot two dot tiff, and then After Effects will read that and put it together as a sequence. Okay, so name dot number dot extension. Okay, frame padding, we can just leave that. That's how many zeros are in the number. Start frame, 1, end frame, whatever you have for your ball bounce. So I'm going to do 35. We want to render every frame. We want to use our perspective camera because that's what I have going right here. We're looking in my perspective view. Again, we're going to learn how to set up cameras at a later date, and we might need to change that. And then we set this up earlier when I tried to make my dimensions here, but you want 1920 by 1080. Then we can hit close. You're going to go over here, down to your rendering drop down, and we're going to go to render, batch render. And then we're going to wait. Okay, so this begins the rendering process. I think my Maya's clipped off. Hold on. Down here, you're going to see rendering with Maya software. And then once it starts rolling, you'll see this update and say, you know, frame 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, whatever it is going to count up all the way to 35. You can also click on this button next to it, which shows more of the coding in Maya, but it's saying that it saves the file and now it's rendering, but it's still going to take time to get started. So I'm going to pause my render. Oh, well, here you can see it now. We're on frame 17, 18, 19, 20. The other main part why you want to open this script editor is because it tells you where it's been saved. So you have a couple options. You can always just search your file. So I know I called it fuller ball bounce. So you can search it and then you can find it. Or you can navigate. So users, Jennifer Fuller, and it's always going to be the same. So documents, Maya, projects, default, images, and here it is. Now for the sake of ease and using After Effects, what I tend to do is put a new folder on my desktop. And drag it over. You can navigate to this folder from After Effects. That's completely fine if you prefer doing that. But again, sometimes it's just easier. Okay, so then I would make sure you increment and save. Depending on how powerful your computer is, I tend to shut down Maya and then open up After Effects. Now, if you are using the lab computer, you'll just need to log into After Effects with your SXU email and your password, just like whatever you use for your email. All right, so this is what After Effects looks like. You probably won't get a disk cache issue. My recording takes up a lot of space. So we're going to go to New Project, and then you're going to create a new composition. Now the great thing is this is just going to match whatever you did in Maya. So I did 1920 by 1080. That matches. You can change this. It won't know what you did in Maya. I'm just saying you should match it. And then 24 frames per second. Start at the 000 mark. That never really changes. And then the duration. This is hours, minutes, seconds, milliseconds. So make sure you are not putting in milliseconds. I have a lot of people that put in milliseconds thinking it's seconds. So if I'm doing 35 frames at 24 frames per second, that is less than a second and a half. So I'm just going to do 1 second, 30 milliseconds. Hit OK. Yours will probably be longer. Then I'm just going to go to File, Import File. Then you just need to find wherever you put that ball bounce and only click the first file. Notice now at the bottom here it says TIFF sequence because After Effects is registering the number and extension that we put in Maya. So just hit OK. You'll hit OK again. And you'll see over here Fuller ball bounce 1 to 35.tiff is in. But there's a little problem. Right here it says 30 frames per second. So right mouse click, interpret footage, main, and just change this to 24 frames per second. Your composition is 24 frames per second, and now your actual file is 24 frames per second. Then just click and drag down. Hit spacebar to preview. Okay? Now, I have extra space here, so I can do two things. I can either click this blue bar right here and drag it in to be the end, because I don't want, blank screen at the end. Or if I move my time slider to the end, I can see over here that my animation is 1 second and 11 milliseconds. So I can go into Composition, Composition Settings, 1 second and 11 milliseconds. And then I'll hit OK. And then that fits. If for some reason you start with a file that's too small and you bring down your animation and it's going off the edge, you can always go Composition, Composition Settings to add more time. And again, you can hit spacebar. Now we can see the whole thing. And now we just need to render it out. Now in After Effects, to get the best kind of file type, you're going to do Composition, Add to Adobe Media Encoder Queue. Email me if you don't have access to Media Encoder. It's on all the computers in the lab. But this is just kind of a software that allows you to change the file type and edit some information in the file. It's not, I can't add motion graphics to it in Media Encoder. It's just how do you want the file to be created? What type of file? How much resolution? You can change things like that. I'm going to pause for a second while this opens too. All right, so this is what it looks like when it opens. And you have to be patient and wait because your file is going to pop up here. There, it heard me talking about it. I have a tendency of going back in After Effects and composition, add to Media Encoder Queue. You don't need to. It will pop up. So then you'll just click this little caret down. We'll do an H.264. Match source high bit rate. You'll leave that the same. And then you'll click on the blue lettering here. What this allows you to do is name your file and tell it where to save. So if you want to put it back on the desktop, it's going to be an MP4 with an H.264 compression. That's perfect. And then you'll hit play to start the render. You'll see it preview down here and you'll see kind of the progress bar to see how the render is going. I would recommend at this point that you definitely have Maya closed just because it is After Effects and Media Encoder open and you're trying to render. Our renders have been taking a pretty short amount of time. Take note now that rendering can take a very long time. Pixar and these big companies have what are called render farms, where they just have towers and towers and towers of computers so that they can render things. But especially for this class, as we get to midterm and beyond, you probably will not be able to render the night it is due, okay? So get used to trying to do your homework a little bit in advance so you don't have to worry about the rendering. This is done. It went through the whole thing. I go to my desktop. Now I have a nice rendered video of my ball bounce. Okay? So you'll need to submit the render, the Playblast, and your Maya file in Canvas. by Sunday. All right? And that is all that I am looking for this week. Feel free to let me know if you have any questions. I look forward to seeing your refined ball bounce videos.